Welcome, everybody, to our video on anti-retaliation law for healthcare workers. We are joined by one of our partners in Voice for Peers, Rob Roark of Roark and Koros, their employment attorneys. Also with us is Nathan Anderson, the program director for recoveryglue.org, and John Keynes, the program director for Best Kentucky Training. So, Rob, welcome. Thank you so much for your participation. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, thank you, Mary Helen. My name is Rob Roark. My law firm based in Lexington, Roark and Chorus. We practice employment cases all over the state, and I have been practicing in Kentucky as a lawyer since 1989. Um, we practice both in state and federal courts, and in the last few years, we have really noticed a lot of cases involving patient safety under the Kentucky law that we have litigated in courts successfully. And so I was glad to, when you asked to talk about this, for things to look out for and for people who may be in that position, what to do and how to do it.
Rob, tell us about the Patient Safety Act.
This statute has actually been in effect for some time, but it was only recently it was given what we call full force and effect. So the General Assembly passed a statute that protects employees in the healthcare field who report issues that could adversely affect patient safety. And they've interpreted that very broadly, and it would include any worker in a healthcare related field. What the statute did not provide, and it's not in the statute, is what is the remedy if you make a report and then the employer takes action against you, such as terminating you. So we have another statute, KRS 446070, that basically has been used in other situations like this. If we have a statute such as this one that makes something illegal but doesn't give a remedy, 446070 gives that remedy. And it was only in the 2020, 2021, a couple of cases made it to the courts of appeals to say, yes, if you make a report under this act and then you suffer retaliation such as termination, you can file suit for it and you can recover your wages, emotional distress, and punitive damages. And so in the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen a plethora, a lot of these cases have come to light.
So, while there hasn't been any specific case law avoiding peer supports or CSAs, this statute still does cover.
Mary Helen, it covers everyone. If a janitor in a facility said,
Really?
I saw a nurse hitting a patient over her head with a broomstick. Now, I'm not making this up. This is in a nursing home case. And then the janitor gets fired, he's covered under that. Okay.
So it's the setting.
Yes, he was an employee. Now,
I
again,
see.
if let me flip this around, it doesn't cover independent contractors.
Right.
So
Right.
if let's go to the same nursing home and a food vendor that delivers food twice a week, they're bringing the food in. They look in a hotel room, they see that same nurse hitting that patient on the head with a broomstick. They go report it to someone in the facility and they say, we're canceling our contract. You're never going to bring us food again. Statute didn't cover that. You're not an employee, you're a contractor.
Okay, now here's something else you brought up to me, which I think is very, very interesting for people to blanketly accept that you are being hired and paid under the right category. So when he says contracted worker, he's not necessarily talking about the people who bring tacos. He could be, he's, if you are 1099, now, if you're
Yes,
not W-2, you are a contracted worker. Uh,
yes.
if your employer is telling you you're a 1099 and you witness something like that, should you say nothing? Should you already dismiss yourself, or should you, or would it be worth to research if you were actually under the correct
Well,
category?
the statute says any employee or agent.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are an independent contractor and you have, let's say, you have authority to order parts or to do something on behalf of that company. They
Okay.
vested authority in you. Would you be considered an agent? And yes, you would be covered. It's always better to report it. Number one, and I've told this to other people who've been afraid about it, is they may look at you and a patient finally comes forward and says, somebody's been hitting me over the head with a broomstick, and they look at you. And if you, of course, if you've already reported it, you saw this happening, well, you're not going to report yourself for doing that. So it's always the right thing to do to report it. Always.
I see. I see. All right. So here's the breakdown of let's see, this is the breakdown of patient care or safety. Now, there are several pages of this that categorize it. I want to go back to certain ones in just a moment after we get a bigger overview of this for some clarity with you, Rob. So some of these should ring a bell. As far as like, yes, I've seen that before. I've certainly
Well,
heard about it.
actually, if you go to the top one,
Yes, sir.
uh, we have not dealt with the patient brokering per se. We have had clients that were aware of those arrangements being made that predated their employment at the particular facility. Insurance fraud is huge, and insurance fraud is actually a different claim than the patient safety because Medicare and Medicaid are often there's often fraud associated with various clinics that seek to keep them sicker and or diagnose them as being sicker than they are in order to bill more money to Medicare and Medicaid. We have a new case that just walked in the door this past week for a lady who was working in a care clinic, and her part of her counseling duties was to make an assessment of the level of depression because obviously the more depressed the patient is, the more
Mm-hmm.
medications they were placed on and the longer they were stayed and billed to Medicare and Medicaid. And she was berated for having less depressed patients than anyone else in any of their other clinics. And it was clear, and she said, you're doing this to over medicate them and to get more money. And then they fired her. So, but back to the Medicare Medicaid fraud, there are different laws in federal courts for pursuing that. That's not part of per se what we're talking about today,
Right.
but oftentimes they go hand in hand. If patients' health is being jeopardized because they're being given too much medicine or the wrong kind in order for the facility to bilk Medicare and Medicaid, it's both fraud and a patient safety issue. We've had other matters where staff members know what their range of practice is and they are being asked to go beyond that and have said it's not safe for the patient. I've never done this before. And again, it winds up, okay, well, you're terminated then. Failure to provide medically assisted treatment. That is, we've seen that in the nursing home context a lot, but it's also in the same clinics that you guys are involved in. That comes up as well.
That's a big deal. The MAT, and John, I see you nodding, and I certainly want you weighing in on all these things because John is on this program because he has seen it all, or heard of it all, or experienced it. One of the three. But MAT in particular, you can you have different ideologies behind recovery. A lot of times the 12-step rooms can get very mobbish as far as like what they will recognize as being recovery, what they'll recognize as saying that is sober. Um, so MAT wasn't accepted for a long time, and there it was stigmatized. Well, then there became some legal implications about it. In particular, there were facilities that were all abstinence based. And whatever your opinion is on that, it doesn't matter. Rob, are you familiar with what I'm talking about these abstinence space facilities that were receiving patients from the jails or something like that that were already on MAT?
We have not, I have heard of it, but we have not dealt with that in the legal context.
I see.
But and I am aware of those clinics, and that problems arise from those who are already being provided, such as methadone or other medications to help with that addiction, and that suddenly is broken off when they go to an abstinence clinic. And that was, I believe, ultimately recognized in our legal system as basically not providing adequate care, medically assisted treatment to someone who's addicted. So
It was presented to me too that could be used as a form of discrimination. For instance, if you will not accept that patient into your facility, that it's considered that you can't deny them treatment. Was that a rumor, or do you think that might be true?
no, there, but it also depends on who the reimburser is. Is that a
Ah,
Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance? And that usually drives that bus. Who's doing
ah,
the reimbursement? So
more complex than I realized. Okay, so John, my nodding head friend,
Yes, I thank you for letting me
please shine some
chime in.
light.
Um, Rob, the last time we had met, you had kind of helped us see the light on this Patient Safety Act that I had never heard of. But all these things that you're discussing, like I have seen some version of it in some fashion at many different times during the last 4 years I worked in treatment. Um, you know, that scope of practice that you were speaking about was a huge one. People that were unqualified to provide services for clients or patients were acting as clinicians, and if they,
Can you give an example, John? Let's say you got hired to be a peer support specialist.
yes, my last employer, this was something that happened on a daily basis, and they minimized it basically. It's okay because you're adding this person to sign it, but you're doing their job for them. Which was illegal. Uh, and when I brought it to the administration's attention, hey, if we get caught doing this, we're going to be in trouble. Not just you as a business, but the person performing these services saying they're a clinician will be in trouble. It wasn't too long after that that I, ended up parting ways with that employer because the situation was made so dire that I couldn't maintain that position any longer. But it was a daily occurrence for all the peer support. Um, and Rob had mentioned several other examples, but that one was the one that stood out in my mind the most because it was so overwhelming at that last job I had.
what we have found is that not only do most healthcare workers are not aware of this statute, the facilities themselves aren't either. For example, when you make a complaint under the patient safety statute, KRS 216B, you put it in writing, and that can be a text, it can be an email, you can scribble out a note, but you always put it in writing because they'll deny ever receiving it. Or if you report it in person and it's recorded, that would suffice. Under the statute, the facility legally is supposed to get back to you in writing within 7 days to say, hey, we looked into it, it's either valid or we're working on it. I've never seen a healthcare facility comply with that part of it, ever.
That kind of
They
surprised me.
just pretend they never got anything?
At first they'll deny it, and then when the you pull it out and say no, they made a copy of the email before you fired them, and it went to you and HR or you as one of the management. Here it is. You can't deny having received it, and there is no explanation. Why didn't you look into it and get back to her? And they never have one.
Okay, I got a question. So John, you resigned, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so is it what if you haven't been fired? What if you what's the rule here? And you and also
Okay.
I remember before you told me about the difference between a W-2 type employee and a 1099.
Yes. So first of all, actionable retaliation, 9 times out of 10, it's got to involve the loss of money. Is it my hours got cut once I made these reports? Well, that's a loss of money. I got suspended without pay for X number of days. That's the loss of money. I got terminated. That's clearly a loss of money. Um, Being ignored, which oftentimes these are, and nothing happens immediately, that in and of itself isn't actionable. So what we have seen is people will make an initial report or two, and then the facility doesn't get back to them, and maybe 30 days later, hey, I brought this up last month, it's getting worse, you have to do something. What we have typically what we have done a lot of times is said, you know what, this involves money, involves potential fraud and patient safety. You can report this to OIG and tell the employer, if you don't do something, I'm going to go to OIG. Well, that sort of forces the hand at that point. Or we have been retained by people to say, hey, they made a report. You then cut their hours, or you made them part time. That's actionable, and sometimes the company will discuss it with us, and sometimes they won't. But the point being, for a retaliation claim to really stick in court, you need to have lost money due to making a report.
Noted. Noted.
Great information there.
Indeed. Indeed. An anecdote you told me from way back of some of a case that you knew of a female that was working somewhere and there was romance going on with the boss. And so that complicated it for her, as was my understanding, and brought about a whole thing about shame or causality that
Well, it in Mary Helen, in that case, she was a former user, and she had come clean and then relapsed and then came clean. Well, she had a small child at home. The boss was adamant that she continued the sexual relations with him, or he would report her to child services and have her
oh,
child taken. Yes. And
yes.
fortunately, that case is actually getting ready to go to mediation.
Oh,
Um,
really? Oh,
yes.
gosh. Oh, but well, exactly. Like when you speak of somebody's background and profile, we know exactly what you're talking about, and that is why our coalition is just so important because we come up with all kinds of reasons why we shouldn't have protections and why it's okay for us to endure something that's not okay. That's um, Nathan, do you have anything to weigh in on that? Why do people think like that? And even if they've been sober for several years, many years, and getting their life back on track, why do they think like that?
As far in what aspect of are you talking about in the thought
I'm
process?
talking about feeling like be not reporting when something, because I mean I've heard the stories like this over and
Well,
over and over again.
okay,
And
there it
later
is.
on, we're going to talk about the fears and stuff
Right.
that keep someone, but just right off the top of your head.
Okay. Well, the first thing, of course, it can be different with everyone. A lot of things could be a person's environment, what they're going through at that particular time. If someone's, kind of going through a lot of negative situations in their life at that time, they're kind of at the point, okay, I can't take any more, so I'm just going to ignore it
Mhm.
on that. But if they're in a pretty good spot, they're not as apt to ignore it, but then you kind of got the social aspect of it. I don't want to be portrayed as a snitch or, so to speak, and so forth, or feel I'm a troublemaker and, just the fear of society looking at them in a negative way.
Yes, or continuing to, or in their mind. Okay, so oh, here's a big one I want to bring up for you to define, please, sir, Rob. Here it's talking about forcing and making patients work for free. That was, I'm sure y'all have heard of the big monolith that is under investigation now. Every time I was reading this, I said, "Oh gosh, I've heard that happened there too." Okay, making patients work for free, forcing patients. At what point would somebody say that's force, that's coercion, that's not elective?
Well, as you know, one of the things, and I know exactly what entity you're talking about, they convinced someone going through treatment to become sober that this was part of their therapy, that it was actually and working in the facility with mopping floors or whatever it was therapeutic in nature. Well, that actually violates the wage and hour laws as well as other laws to make someone work and not pay them anything. Now, there is a difference, or can be a difference, if they have an agreement to spend some time in the facility, but not full-time residency there. And they can do a part of their payment is they might help. I've seen this in other nonprofits where they help at mealtime feeding all the people in the facility, and that gets them a cheaper or lesser rate. And I still don't know that that's okay, but that's far better than what this other place is doing, making people work several hours a week and calling it therapy.
They called it service work. That was
Yeah.
how we were given
That's what I was fixing to say. I was like, thank you, John.
intern. The
The-
interns, after they got to a certain point in that program, were basically, well, they were forced. There was no option. You did it or you left. Because I went through that program. Yeah, after your 40 hours, that was your service work, your 12-step call that you would do, as a AA or NA member. Basically, they had integrated that into their way of thinking to make you feel like, hey, if you didn't do this, it made you feel guilty as if you weren't doing part of your program. And I've seen a lot of people, relapse when they were interns because of it, working so many hours a week.
why do you think they relapsed? Just from overworking or feeling powerless? What do you feel? What do you think?
Overwork. I think when they initially started doing it, it was a value thing. They felt value, felt
Right.
need, and it gets very overwhelming because they have you on the road driving 70, 80 hours a week, taking patients to other facilities, court, whatever transport's needed, um, transfer them in and out of, internal from one program to another. There was a bunch of different reasons, but most of these people were homeless. They had nowhere to go back to. So if they didn't comply, then they were discharged. So not only did they lose their place to sleep, but they also lost their employment, however meager it was. So it was like a double-edged sword.
Is now if things are now, Rob, when things are ugly like that, is that ugly or is that unlawful?
It can be both. Usually, if you're working substantial hours a week in a facility with no pay, it violates the wage and hour laws. And if you are a patient and it's adversely affecting you, a report of it might also trigger the Patient Safety Reporting Act as well. There's it's there's no magic formula for saying, well, when this happens, this law is always implicated or this law is
Hmm.
never implicated at all. It does depend on the circumstances.
This was an interesting one. Relapse encouragement.
Well, the cases that I'm familiar with have a member of a clinic seeing a fellow employee taking a patient's medications and either using them themselves or selling them.
Mhm.
And she reported that, and nothing was done. At least nothing was done until she went to the police about it because these were narcotics.
Hmm.
And then she got fired. I'll add another one, contraindication. So we're representing a lady who worked at a hospital, the really sick people, many of them on feeding tubes. And the medications they were giving them said it was contraindicated to break the tube open because it was an extended release pill. And that led to one person's death. And she reported it, and of course, they fired her. So, contraindication is just as bad as over medication and under medication. Often the wage loss claim is not sometimes the biggest claim to assert. If these are entry level or part time positions
Yes.
that don't necessarily pay that much per hour, however, especially those who are extremely vulnerable because they've been through addiction themselves, they become clean, they start working, they see something unsafe and report it and get fired. That triggers emotional distress damages, and those damages in court are uncapped, the same for punitive damages. So those two damages against an employer, even for someone not making per se very much per hour, can be significant, and it does really depend on the circumstances. If that employee is unlawfully fired but finds a much better job with more pay and better benefits right away, it probably hurts their claim for damages a little bit than someone who gets fired. It triggers more depression. They go without a job for some period of time before finally starting to recover. That would trigger more in the way of emotional distress damages and punitives.
What if you kept your job and you experienced the emotional damages?
As I said, to make a retaliation claim, you usually need to quote lose money.
Hmm.
Now, if you make a report for patient safety and then the management staff starts harassing you, and I've seen this, they're calling you at night about a particular patient, they didn't need to bother you at night, or they're calling you on weekends. The case I was telling you about just now for the lady who reported medicine being given that's contraindicated, after she reported it, her phone would blow up on the weekends. They would ask her to come in, and they didn't need her, and it was all, and she reported that as harassment because I made the initial report, and it was only after she called them out as harassing her
That the call started?
then they
Yes.
fired her. Okay. So, a long way of saying it would have to be pretty significant harassment in order to rise to that level to survive in court.
This is okay. Um, this I thought was interesting about those who report concerns. Employees who assist in reporting but do not follow the report themselves may not be protected. Um, can you help me understand that?
Well, here's what the statute does to it, and I've seen this firsthand in a number of cases. If an individual is going to report a patient safety issue, 9 times out of 10, they're not the only one who's noticed this. Okay, that's if it's fairly significant, someone else has. Is I get someone to go with me, or I copy someone on an email or text that says, I've noticed this, and I believe so and so has noticed this as well. Even though that person didn't come forward with a report, if they testify in court later that, yes, I saw this unsafe practice happening, and she copied me on the email or on the text or whatever, and that witness gets fired, now the statute would kick in to protect them because it would protect witnesses who testify truthfully in favor of someone who makes a claim under the safety statute. But if nothing happens to them, they're simply a witness. They don't have a claim. Okay.
Would you recognize it if it was happening to you? Because it can be overt and it can be subtle. So we listed it down here in some categories, and Rob talked about some of them. The subtle ones I imagine are little ways to make things harder, making your work harder. Um, is it for retaliation?
Yes.
Um,
So let me give you an example of one case that we had for I'm trying to remember if she was a nurse or a nurse's assistant at a particular health clinic, and she made a patient safety complaint on both a boss and a coworker.
Mm.
But the next thing you know, in her section, she was assigned about 8 patients, and the other non-reporting assistants and the people she reported on were each given 1 patient. And she was told she has to basically tripling the amount of her work in a given work day. That brought about some pretty significant emotional distress.
Mm.
They had to send a letter and demand that, well, ultimately, as they ultimately fired her, but before they fired her, this is what they did to her, and that was clear retaliation.
Okay, so let's say you're experiencing retaliation. What is your next step when you recognize this is what's happening?
At a minimum, put it in writing. You can say in a text or an email, I know what you guys are doing. You've been mad at me and harassing me ever since I reported X, Y, and Z. And I see it, and you need to stop that because it's adversely affecting me. That way you documented what they're doing.
So
And if
it's
it's
more, I see. So with somebody would probably they're immediately going to think they need a lawyer, but it sounds like they may not. They may
at that
just.
point, if they're still working there, they haven't really lost any money. The lawyer can write a letter for them, but at that point, and they could even call and talk to a lawyer and say, "Here's what's going on. I'm going to write a letter, or an email, or a text, and say X, Y, and Z." And that may be, a very short consult. But usually at that level, the employee can put them on notice. I know you're harassing me. You're mad at me for making this report, and you need to stop that.
But it does not necessarily need to come from an attorney.
No.
Okay.
Now, if it'd be the first time ever, but if the company says, okay, you're right, we were retaliated, won't happen again. Everything's perfect now. That would be a first for me. I've never seen that. Um, but if so, then you're good now. But chances are that's not going to happen.
Mm.
It
Well,
does have to be in writing, though, right?
It really does. And, and,
Okay.
and again, the writing or it can be recorded on a phone. Email, texts, and recordings on phones are the biggest three I see. There have been text message exchanges between the reporting person and a boss about one of the issues
yes.
about so those always come in as evidence.
Hmm.
There's never a problem with that.
Hmm.
So long as you have one of those three, recording on your phone. If you're forced, a lot of times you make a report and then the next time, come in my office, we need to talk. I just got your complaint. Well, it's hard for them to document anything, but some of the some of the people that we dealt with have turned their phones on and said, okay, what do you want? I got this, and how dare you, how many people have said, how dare you go behind my back and say this and this? Um,
Are you allowed to record people in Kentucky?
yeah,
Really? I thought I
so
wasn't.
long as one of the parties to the call or the in-person meeting or the phone call knows it's being recorded, that's fine.
The diagnosis you'll see is general anxiety disorder and depression. Now, if you get to the point to where people start having suicidal thoughts or actually attempting suicide, you can get into the major depressive disorder. So it can really have some lasting effects if they don't take actions to resolve the problem.
Is it possible that people try to protect their mental health by pretending something's not there?
Well, a lot of times they can externally, but internally, this is a negative situation that comes up. And we, as human beings, when we have a negative situation, it's very hard to look at the positive. But then again, once we go into a negative situation, the negative keeps getting more negative. We start creating scenarios. If I do this, this is going to happen, and that's going to happen. And it seems like the end result of that scenario we create, we will create the worst possible ending for that situation. And so they kind of get trapped in that box and not even looking at the positives. Hey, I can get this taken care of. I can seek legal counsel. When they get to that point, these other things aren't even an option. They don't even think about it. And that's where, a lot of the mental health disorders start.
Rob, I want to ask you, um, because of to become a peer support specialist, and I think this is true of CSA as well, you have to have a mental health diagnosis in your life. Okay, so you're already a subgroup of subpopulation. Um, can people that have a history of mental health, and let's say even though your whole workforce has got that, okay, your whole peer support workforce, can you be looked at as f- like a fragile sort, discredited because of the effect it has on you because of your background?
No, no. There's an old adage in the civil law. And when I say so, that means common law statutes. A defendant who gets sued by a plaintiff, it's called take the plaintiff as you find them. If they have an eggshell skull and you barely dented their bumper and it caused brain damage because of their fragile skull, you're still on the hook.
Oh,
Now what I would add is that employers who employ peer specialists such as these, knowing that background, know exactly how vulnerable they are if they, depending on how they treat them. So they can't, they don't get any breaks as far as, well, they're already a mess because of their background. No, that's not how this works at all. As a matter of fact, you knew that going in, and then when they tried to say something about an unsafe practice, you gave them a hard time or you fired them, and it was worse on them than it would be, say, other people who haven't dealt with that.
yes, yes, that's exactly right. Rob, I cannot thank you enough for all the
Sure.
information you've given, and you're extremely helpful. I knew this was going to go over because it's a big
Well,
topic.
so glad that you asked me, and look forward to working with you.
Excellent.
Take
Thank you.
care. Bye.
Let's talk about the fear. And what I was kind of hoping to talk about is a lot of times, like when we state what the fears are and we bring them out, then it becomes something that you can talk and discuss instead of afraid of being
Internalizing.
yeah, internalizing everything, afraid of being a problem, all of that stuff. So, what do you think, Nathan?
Well, the problem is it's not just one fear. It is several fears, and it is very, very overwhelming. Okay, I have a fear I'm going to lose my job. I have a fear socially that I'm going to be portrayed in this way. Okay, then I have a fear if I lose my job, I'm going to lose my home, I'm going to lose my family. And that's kind of how that scenario takes place. And they feel trapped. I mean, that they're in a box that does not have an opening. And they don't want to do anything to trigger those events from happening. So they kind of talk themselves out of it, even though they're still under that stress
Yeah.
of what is being taking place in that. Counseling, yes. If you want to start with counseling to get some things out, to get some things, sorted out, to get better organized, talk to legal counsel. And what a lot of people don't understand is they can seek legal counsel, and that is confidential, kind of like, the counselor client confidentiality. It's the same with legal advice as well. And, they should seek, if not both, a counselor or therapist and legal counsel. They should seek at least one of them to kind of get things straightened out, to keep their mental health in check.
Okay, so let's say you're in recovery. Let's say you don't have a therapist. Let's say you don't have that. You're on Medicaid, okay?
Right?
Um, and worried about getting thrown off that. You've just on that threshold that you might, get thrown off of that. What would be your reason, your rationale that insurance would cover you to see a therapist. Um, because I agree with you, getting your recovery and getting your mind right is step one, not running to the attorney. So what do you think about that, Nathan? What would be their rationale? Is that something that they can see a therapist about, that their insurance would cover, you believe?
That would be something that they could see a therapist about. As far as the insurance, I absolutely think that because at this point, you are suffering from anxiety.
If you're suffering from anxiety. So, all right, now we're not telling you to
Oh,
go to your therapist for legal advice. Okay,
no,
we're not telling you to do that.
absolutely not. No, you're not
Uh-uh.
going to the therapist, and the therapist, if you did bring up these things, therapist would advise you, to seek an attorney for that.
Right,
But in order to get themselves straight, they're going through depression, they're going through anxiety.
right.
So they have every right. These are billable diagnoses that insurance will cover
Yes. So
for
you don't
that.
have to figure it out
Absolutely.
on your own.
No,
John, were
no,
you saying something, John?
I was talking to my kids. I was going to
Oh,
say that this would be considered a life-changing event, like because somebody has potentially lost their job or fear of it. So this would be a huge situation.
yes.
absolutely, absolutely. Because anxiety and depression, and this is something that can cause, and actually, if they don't get treated, it can cause not only mental effects, it can cause physical effects as well.
Oh gosh. John, just to share a bit of intimacy about John, gosh, you just do such a wonderful job with Best Kentucky Training. We've been going for 8 weeks and you've already got 650, I think, or are we closer to 700? He's on fire. So, it was a, I see it as a miracle that I got him on board with our company. He was in Glen Grant, and I just happened to talk to you one day, and you were not yourself.
I was in the very situation that Nathan and Rob were talking about when Mary and Helen and I had spoke a few months back. I was clueless as to what to do. I had no idea that I had any legal ramifications that I could pursue. Um, Namely because of my background. I'm a person in long-term recovery. Prior to that, I was a different person. I've got a lot of criminal convictions on my record, and I didn't think I had a leg to stand on, even though my previous employer was the one that had pretty much boxed me into a corner to where, my day-to-day job was unbearable. So it was either continue the unethical practices that they were wanting me to do or leave. And because of my background, I felt that I would be the easy scapegoat, so I left. Nathan had, I think, had mentioned that, or maybe Rob had, one of them had, or kind of shaded to it a little bit. Um, because of my background, it put me in a place of constant fear that, if OIG or the government came in and started questioning, who else would they look? I'm an easy target because of that, or I felt I was. Um, Rob made a good point about putting it in writing. That was something I had no idea about. I was always under the impression that Kentucky is an at-will state. You can be fired for whatever reason, or you can quit for whatever reason. I
No,
had
that's
no,
not the same. That's not the same.
and that's something that I've
The
learned.
law is actually you don't have to give reason. That's not the same thing as you can be fired for any reason. And
Right.
that's how people interpret it. You can't fire somebody to get rid of them because they've made a complaint.
Right. And in my situation, I had spoke to the administration about some of the things that, because I was basically in this role, I was hired as a peer support, but I was doing the job that Nathan does for us here,
Oh
and
boy.
I don't have his licensure, not even close to it yet. But I did that job day to day, every day. Um, and eventually that would have came back on us, and I just felt like ethically, it was wrong. My integrity I felt was in the dumpster on fire because they were continually pushing me to do this. I knew how to do it, but that didn't make it right. So when I talked to my boss about it, things got very icy after that, and things began to change. My position, I got less hours, but they wanted me to do
Oh,
different. It was a bad situation all around. So it was a blessing when we spoke. I was like, wow, thank you.
Rob said before, because he was saying it's about dollars lost and all of that kind of stuff. So the fact that I picked you up and was like, great, come with me, because I knew how much value you had. You didn't have the loss of, let's say, somebody that, because you said you'd worked very hard to build up to the wage you'd had. You were already committed to that level of income with your family and all of this, and now it goes to zero. And for you to get another job, would you be able to get a job like that when so yeah, you were in a pickle.
Yeah, in a very,
So
very bad situation.
yes, I can see that but it was a wonderful benefit that we'd cross paths, but that's not everybody's story at all.
No, no, it really isn't. I was in that constant state of fear
Mhm.
and the acute stress Nathan spoke about. That was where I was at every day.
Mm, yes, and you know what? Because you're from Pikeville, you don't show it, but that doesn't mean it's not going in there. Both these fellas are from Pikeville. I live in Lexington. I call them Pikeville twins. Um,
It's a good
y'all were also speaking today about worrying about getting blackballed or a snitch. Was that a thought you had as well, Don?
For me, it was because the recovery community workplace in our area is so small. It would be very easy for that to become a reality. Uh, because, again, it goes back to my background, somebody, or that in my mind it did.
Mhm.
Um, when in reality, really, maybe that isn't the case, but I do think it would have made it a little more difficult in the long run.
Oh boy, I would think that, and that goes into it too, like we were saying before on the cards. I'll go back to talk about something with Nathan for just a second about um, what's the point? Um, and Rob is very modest when he says this, when you get a settlement. If you have been victimized by this and it falls and you have a case, um, you're going to be paid. Nathan, should I move on? What should I be asking myself? And what are the right motivations?
Okay.
We've already talked about because money's involved, okay? As he said, a significant, okay? Now I can tell you, my idea of significant and his idea of significant is a lot different. His number is going to be bigger than my idea.
Right. Well, I actually, as far as moving on, uh, not unless you deal with, take every avenue that you can take, seek legal counsel, therapy, and so forth, but ignoring it, no. You need to address this for several reasons. One, you may be entitled to monetary uh, reimbursement.
Compensation.
I'm sorry, compensation, or just for your own mental health. Because things like this, even if you did move on, and let's say you quit the company, you're still going to live with that. You're going to know that this company did this to you and you did nothing. And a lot of times, and I've seen this, I've heard this a lot of times. I've had clients that have been done this way, and in the past they said, "I wish I would have done that," but by the time the statute had run out, or for whatever reason, other reason, they didn't do that, and so this has been like years
Mhm.
after something had been done. They're still feeling the effects of this.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Can you get help anonymously? You kind of touched on it before about the confidentiality and what kind of help should I get? We touched on it before, and as far as what happens in a legal consultation, um, Voice for Peers helps you prepare for your legal consultation. And they can go all different kinds of ways. Unfortunately, Rob is not here, but to explain it, but we can do that later. Now, I put this down for a reason. What to consider first? Number one, your recovery. Number two, refer back to number one. Number three, refer back to number two. It really is that. It starts and ends with that. Okay, and so we put here on your to-do list, if you are a peer support or you are a person in recovery that is considering exploring your options, this is what we suggest. Number one, to expand and deepen your recovery program, especially utilizing private and group therapy. Number two, watch our employment law videos to familiarize yourself with the statutes. Also familiarize yourself with us so that you have a name to ask for when you call. You can submit an anonymous entry to our employment law Q&A. Oops, go back. Contact Voice for Peers to start your confidential consultation process with Roark and Chorus employment law firm. Okay. We believe by following the to-do list, you will be better prepared, supported, and informed to make the right decision for you.
Yeah, Nathan hitting on that, the legal consultation being confidential. In my situation, that was something that never entered my mind because I was so wrapped up in the stress of the moment. I wasn't even thinking outside the box that I was in, so to speak. So I definitely encourage people to reach out for help because, like, you are more valuable than that moment. So,
And in this industry is more valuable than that moment. You and the industry, because it's no secret how shady the recovery industry can be, and you can sit and wonder why. And since we've been in Grin Grant, since we started Grin Grant, I've asked around, how come everybody knows how so the answers I would get would be like, well, we're going to go talk about policy here and we're going to talk about this statute. And it's like, but there already are. They're already, what's that going to do? And so that's when we thought about Voice for Peers and said, nope, we're going to empower the individual and we're just going to sue them. We're going to sue them on a personal level. That's what we're going to do. We're not going to wait to see what this agency does and that agency does. So when we were going around looking for partners and I was explaining to different people, we were trying to see the need. I said, look, here's the profile. Okay. Here are the things that why they don't, here are the scenarios. And Rob's firm was on it right away. And so the next thing we were discussing was about that could be really intimidating. Like if you go to his website, that's pretty intimidating. Don't let it be. We're going to help you not have it be. We're in recovery too. We understand. So that's why we set up Voices for Peers. And just like we do in Griffin, we don't send you to some dentist that's a knucklehead that's going to talk down to you ever. So we absolutely understand that this is about your whole recovery, your whole life, and it's about the industry at large. And we feel just a few examples of somebody standing up for themselves is going to be such a deterrent that you're going to be amazed how fast it's going to clean up this injury, this industry. Amazed because it's happening on the peer support level. That's where it's happening because like we were talking about vulnerability, quite frankly, folks, easy to pick on.
the people that have the most contact with the patient client are the ones And I don't know why that is, but I guess because our vulnerability, like you had said, and a lot of us do have backgrounds. Um, I'm sure there's a number of other reasons, but those are the two major ones that stick out in my mind.
Yeah, we don't want to be a problem anymore.
Yeah.
Trying to do
We
the right
don't.
thing.
So,
And nobody knows that more than them.
yeah.
Did you have any other comments on it, Nathan, before we close out?
Well, like I said, it just takes, as you said, a handful of people to make the move to give the strength for others to kind of follow suit of it. Okay, hey, this is socially acceptable. This is the right thing to do, and they see the actual results of what they do. As far as the positive results, and so that's kind of the role models, the people that does it. So it has a handful of people can make a great impact.
Yes. So I agree. Fellas, can't thank you enough for once again coming forward to help our peers and other people in recovery and people interested in helping people in recovery to shed some light on something that doesn't get discussed very much.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for having us, Mary Ellen. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
You got it.
See you
Bye-bye.
all.